Hi, and welcome to the Home Assistant running on Synology in Docker, mostly. Today, for the last time, we will be working with the hassio package from Frederique. This time, we will be preparing everything to migrate from hassio package, Syno community package, to the Docker containers. We'll start in 10 seconds. But as always, before we go on any further with the video, I really would like to thank all the members who have joined my channel. Thank you very much, your support really means a lot. And now let's get cracking with the video. It's been about a year or even more since I made the hassio package video. What is a hassio package? It's a Home Assistant Supervised running on a Synology in a way of a Syno standard package. This was done by Frederick, and I really do have to thank him for this package. But for the last couple of months, we have seen a couple of changes. First, around last summer, there was already a warning that this package will be, let's call it like that, obsolete or removed. After that, we all remember the fix for hassio, where we had to insert the jobs.json file to prevent it from stopping or to make it work for us running it on Synology. But unfortunately, with the latest supervisor changes, a lot of people, including myself, have experienced problems or errors or issues when trying to update or restart certain add-ons. This happened to the users of ESPHome or Mosquito, as I said, when they restarted or reinstalled the package. So, what's the workaround? No, this time there isn't a fix. The fix is to make your system support it. So, what are your options? Well, first option is something that I already have a lot of videos on. This is running Home Assistant inside Docker on Synology. This version is supported and has always been supported. Unfortunately, you will not have access to Supervisor, and all the add-ons you can install, but you will have to install them manually. As I said, I already have a lot of videos about it, and I will definitely be creating more and more content in regard to Docker installation on Synology. And Docker installation on Synology videos don't work just on Synology, you can use them on any Linux-based systems, for example Debian, Ubuntu, or some other Linux system. And the second option is to run it in the Synology Virtual Machine Manager or VMM. For the system to run, you have to have A, supported machine, B, enough RAM, and 3, your drives have to be in a BTFS format. I'm using ext4, so no luck for me. Okay, and you did go to the Synology Package Center, and there you couldn't find VMM. Well, all is not lost. Maybe. You still have option to manually try to install it. If you manage to install it, and once again I repeat, you must have BTFS file system for that. If you install it and are able to run it, then you can also run your system, although it is not officially supported on the VMM list. And why are not some of the systems supported? A, I presume that this is because of the type of the CPU. Maybe your CPU is just not powerful enough. And B, maybe your system doesn't have enough RAM. And when we talk about RAM, if your system has 4 or less gigabytes of RAM, I wouldn't recommend running your Home Assistant in VMM. For that, you can once again use Docker. Can your system memory be upgraded? Well, then upgrade it. And if you manage to get 6, 8, 10, 12, or 16 gigabytes of RAM inside your Synology, then you are good to go. Because in my next video, I'll be showing you how to install Synology in VMM, and I definitely recommend that you have at least 2 gigabytes extra RAM that you can give to the virtual machine. Running with anything less, it can be painful and slow, and painfully slow. So let's get cracking with today's video. What we will do in today's video is I will show you how you manually can move your Home Assistant from the hassio package into Dockerized version of Home Assistant with add-ons. Once again, those add-ons will need to be installed by hand. No more clicks inside Supervisor. So let's get started. As you can see, I'm running this currently on the Proxmox machine. And after this recording is done, and I'm satisfied with the recording, this setup is gone. Okay, most of the tasks that we do today will be done inside the DSM, Synology DSM, or inside terminal. I will not be covering steps inside the terminal in this video because I previously recorded and published them. There will be a new versions for probably each of the containers I did before, but this will be done through the time. So whenever I point here, you will also be able to check the link to the current version, most up-to-date version for installation of that Docker container. First things first, before you do anything else, make sure you have snapshot. You really do need to have snapshot, just in case if you want to roll back and get the hassio package working. You do not want to do everything from the scratch. For that, let's go to Home Assistant. Inside Home Assistant, go to Supervisor, Snapshots, and make sure that you have a recent snapshot. As you can see here, I already created one because it really takes a long time for it to be created on this slow system. And what I also made sure is that I have a local copy of the snapshot. How do you make a local copy? You press on it or click on it and just select here Download Snapshot. On my Synology, I have a special folder where I keep all my snapshot locally. Now that you've made sure that you have a snapshot, let's go back to Synology. Back in Synology, let's create a list of what are the things that we have to move from add-ons to the containers. Docker, container, and here is a list of all the containers I have. They start with the Home Assistant, and I will be moving Home Assistant as the last container. We have Mosquito, Configurator, VS Code, Portainer, Node-RED, Grafana, ESPHome, and one I do not have listed here because I already removed it, but still we will be moving it to the Docker version today, is the Zigbee to MQTT. What is the order where you want to start? Let's look at what components can work with the Home Assistant and what are the components that other components need. For example, if you have Zigbee to MQTT, then you must have Mosquito. So this is the first container that I would suggest you to move to the Docker version. And you're lucky because if you follow the link here, you can see the new video I created on how to create a Mosquito in the Docker container. Good thing also is that Mosquito doesn't really require any specific configuration. It does have its persistence database if you are using it, but you can discard it because all the devices will populate with the current data as they log into the new system. So what is the procedure to migrate? First, you would have to stop this container, but you will not be stopping it here. Once again, go back to Supervisor. In Supervisor, go to Dashboard, click on a container name, and select here Stop. This will tell Supervisor to stop and not restart the container. This is really important because if you do it through the Docker UI, the Supervisor can see this as a container crash, and if you have Watchdog enabled, it would restart the Docker container itself. So make sure you stop the container here. After you've stopped the container, you can follow the link to my new video on how to install MQTT. And also, while you're there, add usernames and passwords if you need them. And how would you know that you need them? Well, if you have devices that use username and password to connect to MQTT, or if your Home Assistant uses username and password to connect to MQTT, then you have to add those passwords. And let's check how I have it configured here. If I go to Configuration, Integrations, MQTT, and reconfigure MQTT. And by the way, this is a step that you would also have to do after you install your new Docker container. You can see here that I have IP address, default port, and I also have username and password. This is the username and password that I would need to add to my new MQTT configuration. And you're lucky because in my new video, I also tell you how to do that. Now, you have stopped the MQTT. You have created once again the new MQTT, but this time using a Docker. And you have configured it. Configured it means that you have created at least default configuration. I suggested what you can do in default configuration, and you've started it. After it has started, you would do what I did just now. Go to Configuration, Integrations. Here is the information pulled from your old Mosquito, add-on Mosquito. So you would need to go to Configure, press Reconfigure, type here the IP address of your Synology, because yes, it is working on your Synology in a Docker. Type in the port and specify the username and password if you are using them. And by the way, I really do recommend that you use username and password. After you click Submit, your options may not look the same as mine do, but this is my test setup, and my test setup is really working with MQTT from the main setup. I did it because it allows me then to share the devices and sensor data between the main and recording setup without the need to set up two Zigbee networks at my home, because oh, the Zigbee. Press Submit. And now your Home Assistant will be working with the MQTT that you just created inside the Docker container. That's the first step. So what are the next steps? Let's go back to Synology DSM. In Synology DSM, we can scratch this off the list. You can, for example, add Portainer. Same step. Go to Home Assistant, stop it there, make sure it is stopped, then follow this link to install Portainer. It will then install it, and you can just later on add it by using the panel iframe. I also recorded a video on how to use panel iframe. Panel iframe allows you to have Portainer listed here once again. So at this point, for example, you have already moved Portainer and Mosquito, and those are really pretty simple ones because they do not require you to migrate any configuration. What about Node-RED or Zigbee to MQTT? Well, things there are a bit different and require you to be a bit more careful. So let's look at the Zigbee to MQTT. Let's go back to Synology. Let's close this. Let's open up FileStation. And in FileStation, since we already did move MQTT and Portainer, and yes, for me they are currently empty because I will not be moving them, we need to prepare to move Zigbee to MQTT. If you follow my video, steps will tell you to create a couple of folders. First folder has to be Zigbee to MQTT. This is the main folder, and under that folder we will be keeping all the rest of the files. So create folder, Zigbee to MQTT. Next, if I'm not mistaken, we have to create folder data inside Zigbee to MQTT. So I'll open it while double-clicking, create folder, name it data. And the last folder, also if I'm not mistaken, will be log folder, where Zigbee to MQTT will be keeping log files. So inside data folder, I will create additional folder called log. Okay, this is where things become a little bit more complicated. And let me explain. If we go back to Home Assistant and check the configuration inside Home Assistant for Zigbee, you can see that the configuration is as it should be. So everything is more or less the same as it is if you visit the web page for Zigbee to MQTT and look at the sample configuration, except I think those two lines. But we will be removing those two lines a little bit later. So what you can do is click anywhere inside this configuration, press Ctrl A or select all if you are on Mac, right click, copy everything and go back to your Synology. In Synology data folder, create new file that will be called configuration.yaml. This is the default name for the configuration file for the Zigbee to MQTT. Press here, text editor, file, new, paste what you copied before, file, save as, Docker, Zigbee to MQTT, data, and as I said, rename the file to configuration.yaml and press save. So we now have configuration.yaml file inside our Zigbee to MQTT data folder. Why we did that? Let me show you something. If you would go to hassio, Share, because this is where the Zigbee to MQTT configuration is kept. Click on a Zigbee to MQTT. You will see here a file called configuration YAML file. And this configuration file here is different than the one we created here. As you can see, this one is 851 bytes, and the one here is 613 bytes. We do not have to go too deep, but trust me, you cannot use this configuration YAML file inside your Zigbee to MQTT Docker. It is a completely different format. Home Assistant add-on version, if I'm not mistaken, is using JSON for the format of the file, while the Zigbee to MQTT inside the Docker container uses pure YAML. Okay, but if you would at this point create the Docker container for Zigbee and start it, you would lose everything you have paired. So wait a second. In order for you to save everything, this is the device names, all the configurations and everything, make sure that you copy any additional files you have here. As you can see, since this is my test recording, I do not have anything here, but in my real setup, I do have a lot of files. So what are the files that you would need to copy from share Zigbee to MQTT folder to the Zigbee MQTT data folder that you just created? All. Maybe not all, because we already have configuration YAML file, but we can select database, state.json, devices.json, secrets, and groups. You can, if you want, copy also database backup, but don't copy any of the configuration YAML files, no matter if they are backup or not, because those will not work inside the Zigbee to MQTT running inside the Docker. So just select the files, press Ctrl+C to copy them, and move them to the data folder here. As you can see, I've done that before on my setup. I did copy those older files, but as I said, you really do not need it. The only things that you need to copy are devices, secrets if you are using, groups, database, and state.json to give you the list of all the states. That's it. The next thing that you would need to do is open your data file, configuration YAML file, and here fix the server IP of your Mosquito. So for example, as I have moved this already to my Docker container, I will just type here the IP address of my Synology device. Next, if you are using username and password and not using secrets file, you would type here username and password for that user. Okay, you can now press Ctrl+S and make sure that you also remove those first two lines, data path and external converters, because we will not be using them at this point. Just delete. Remove those two lines and make sure to press save once again. And this really should be it. At this point, you have already moved Portainer, MQTT and Zigbee to MQTT to a new Docker installation. The same steps you need to follow for all the other containers. For example, let's switch again to Supervisor. Let's go back. For example, next one can be ESPHome. What you would do, you would go here, press on stop button to stop the container. Use this guide to install ESPHome. And after you have installed ESPHome using my guide or any other guide on the internet, you just need to copy the files from the ESPHome folder to the new ESPHome folder. And if you did everything correctly, the new ESP folder should be here. ESP files are usually located inside the Home Assistant folder. I already did create home-assistant folder. And this is the folder where all the configuration files for the Home Assistant in future will be located. So what you can do is you can copy from the Home Assistant ESPHome folder everything to the new ESP folder here. Okay, so at this time we also have ESPHome working. And this is really easy way on how to convert your add-ons from Home Assistant add-ons to independent Docker containers. Okay, the last step. What is the last step? After you have moved everything, and by the way, some containers really are not worth to move. For example, ADB server. There is already Python ADB that is integrated inside Home Assistant, So if you are using ADB server to connect to your Android TV boxes or Android TV devices or Android devices, you just need to remove that container and use the integration that is embedded inside Home Assistant called Python ADB. This is how I did it, and it works perfectly. Okay, so you moved everything, and the only container left for you to move is, of course, Home Assistant. So how would you do that? It's also very simple. Before we do anything else, please make sure that you have snapshot of your system. If you later on want to move to Home Assistant working in a virtual machine on Synology, you would definitely need or want to have snapshot because it will make your installation of Home Assistant really easy. Second of all, if you ever want to do rollback to hassio, you definitely need snapshot to get it working once again. So make sure you have a snapshot. The next step is to stop the hassio package once and for all. And if you did everything correctly, this will be the last time that you will be using this package. Go to Package Center, Installed, hassio. Say thanks once again to Frederick because he really did help all of us to have a simple and easy installation while it worked. Unfortunately, we also all knew that this was unsupported and this now was to be expected. Press on Stop. Yes. It will take a couple of seconds to stop it. And after it has stopped, you can close it. You do not have to uninstall it now. You can do it later on in a week, month, 2 months, years, 10 years. Depends on how you want and when you have free time. Let's go to Docker to check what is now down and what is still working. Go to Containers. Let me enlarge this and just stop all the other add-ons and hassio containers that are still working. So Node-RED, Portainer, VS Code, Configurator, Audio, Command Line Interface, DNS, Multicast, and Observer. At this point, we are done with those containers. You should already see here your Portainer, VS Code, Mosquito, Zigbee to MQTT, and all the other containers that you did install in the meantime. Leave them running. And the last step, as I said, was to install Home Assistant. So what are the steps for Home Assistant to move it from hassio to Docker version? Let's close this. Let's go once again to File Station. Make sure that you have created this Home-Assistant. I really do like to use this dash because it makes difference between this folder, which I always know this is a Docker or container version of Home Assistant, then the Home Assistant, which is altogether written by the hassio package. So in Home Assistant, you probably do not have anything except maybe ESPHome, where we copied the files previously. Go to your Home Assistant folder here. Make sure that you see everything listed and make sure that you have those dot folders here, meaning .cloud, which is used by Nebuchadnezzar, if I'm not mistaken. .git is used if you are using GitHub, so not everybody has it, but if you are using GitHub, then you probably have it already here. And the last one is .storage. This is the most important folder. I know that all of your configuration files are kept here, but everything that has been done and configured through the UI of Home Assistant is kept inside this .storage folder. So if you forget to copy this, unfortunately, you will be losing a lot of configurations and a lot of integrations, and you would need to manually add a bunch of stuff that you did add through the user interface. So click anywhere inside folder, press Ctrl A, copy it, go to your newly created Home Assistant folder, and just paste everything here. I will use paste skip because I already did copy contents of ESPHome folder and I do not want to copy unnecessary files. And it will take some time to copy everything because the contents of the folder, depending on the size of your system, can be even compressed about 40 to 50 megabytes, also depending on the size of the database for the Home Assistant. And that's it. And at this point, everything is ready for you to just simply install Home Assistant in a Docker. And once again, you can use this guide here to help you to install Home Assistant inside Docker. And by the time it boots up, it should read the current configuration file and you should have Home Assistant working. Maybe you will need to tweak something, for example, paths and things like that, but for that you can just check the log files and correct any error you may have in your system. And this really is it. Unfortunately, I know that I didn't show a lot of things, but remember, for each of those containers, there is also a separate guide. I created guides for a lot of containers, so you can use those guides to help you to convert and create a new setup for your Docker version of Home Assistant. And also, don't forget that the Home Assistant running in Docker is supported by the Home Assistant team. So now you're once again running a supported Home Assistant installation. And really, this is it. I know that video was a bit longer than you probably wished for, but also I know that some of you wanted more details. There are really not that much more details than I showed you here. Everything has to be done by hand. Sometimes by hand means typing a long command to get the Docker working, but also the other times, command is just to copy files from one folder to the other folder. Remember to be careful with the Zigbee to MQTT, to copy all the databases and every file except configuration file, and for the configuration, go inside your supervisor and copy the contents of your configuration from that to a new file called configuration.yaml file. Also remember that Home Assistant Supervised, because this is now called Home Assistant Core, so Home Assistant Supervised can have supported type of installation on Synology. You just need to use VMM or Virtual Machine Manager. And this is it for this Home Assistant running on Synology inside Docker video. I hope that you did enjoy this video and I hope that you find this video useful, especially if you were using hassio on a Synology. If you still have some kind of a comment or a question in regard to this video or any other previous video I made, you can always find me on Discord server, and the link to Discord server is always in the description of the video. But you can also leave comment down in the comment section below. If you still haven't subscribed, please subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss my next video where I will be covering installation of Home Assistant inside VMM on Synology. And yes, that is also supported. I'll be seeing you next time. Until then, bye bye and have fun.